All right, we have a very special guest with us today, one of the most comprehensive watermen of really any era, and world-renowned for his multidisciplinary exploits in the ocean. He is an 8-time world stand-up paddleboard champion. He's an inspired windsurfer, kitesurfer, foiler, pretty much everything. He's been a Big Wave Award winner, the youngest person ever inducted into the Surfers Hall of Fame. He's been a QS competitor. He's been a CT wildcard. He is a family man and the star of Red Bull's Life of Kai web series, which has its 4th season out right now. We have Maui's Kai Lenny on the podcast. Kai, thank you so much for coming on the lineup.
Stoked to be here.
Yeah, and where do we find you today? Because you've had a pretty busy summer, but are you back home at Maui right now?
Just got back home to Maui after a good month in Indonesia surfing and a quick pit stop in Los Angeles for the ESPY Awards. And yeah, time's been flying. You know, when you end up having 2 kids and around the 2-year mark, things just move quick. And, you know, it feels like we're already well and truly in the middle of summer and winter's just around the corner.
Very, very blurry. Now, can you talk to us a little bit about you being in LA, because you accepted a pretty important award on behalf of the Maui community?
Yeah, I was very honored to get the call up while I was in Indonesia to join a few other notable surfers that, you know, contributed their efforts to the Lahaina fires and helping the survivors of that terrible tragedy. And so flew from Indonesia all the way to Los Angeles with the family and accepted the ESPY Award, the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award for the Maui surf community. And, you know, it's funny because it felt like a real honor to be on stage, but there's just so many unsung heroes that contributed so much that probably won't get the recognition they deserved. And while staying on this stage, I just wish everyone could have been there. But, yeah, you know, I was honored to just hopefully shine a light and bring attention to the tragedy that was the Lahaina and Kula fires. Because that being said, it's almost been the 1-year anniversary. And I think more than ever, people are dealing with kind of mental health issues. A lot of it has to do with just not having a home, not being able to get over the trauma that they experienced, losing family members, losing their home, basically. So, yeah, that's... It's hopefully gains a little more momentum to support a lot of the people that are still struggling.
Yeah, you know, and as you said, and it's very humble of you that you'd want all of the unsung heroes up there, you know, receiving the award. But for someone like yourself with your profile, it has the added advantage of bringing attention to it. You know, we had, you know, another Maui icon in Lauren Spalding on the podcast last week, and we talked about how we were coming up on the 1-year anniversary of it, and such a profound tragedy. Is there anything that listeners can do? Is there anywhere they can go to continue to support as the community sort of rebuilds itself?
I mean, you know what? Of course, if somebody wants to donate, I would say one of the best programs or best charitable foundations that is based here on Maui is the Maui Pono Foundation. And just recently they helped support a bunch of families, actually 50 families, spend 2 days in Disneyland free of charge, get them off the island, have some fun with their family members. And they're going to help support, along with Alaska Airlines and some others, to get people getting off the island and you know, maybe have a little separation so when they come back they can start with a bit of a clean slate, because most people need a break like that. And that's super cool. That's great for, you know, families and mental health. And then of course, like, the Maui Pono Foundation is also doing a lot of stuff to help people rebuild, help people, you know, basically survive day to day. And there's a lot of other foundations like that, but that one in particular, we know where all the money is going to. I think, you know, in the beginning, a lot of the bigger foundations, they have such large overheads because there's such big conglomerates that they end up, like, a lot of stuff gets tied up in administrative fees. Whereas I think the locally based foundations, no one really that's working on it, no one wants anything from it. They want it all to go to the people, and they know where to give it to the people. So that's, you know, one way to support. And, you know, of course, it's like we're reaching out to different people that are in that sort of field. Actually, I learned a lot about my brain when I had that concussion at Pipeline. Right. And, you know, Brain Health Hawaii has been working towards utilizing the stuff that I used, like these basically targeted sensors on your head to help people recover from, whether it's like been the smoke damage that can occur from your lungs or to your head. All of that, contributes to it. And so, there's just, everyone's still working at it. It's just a lot more behind the scenes, of course. It's not the front page news, and that was always going to happen.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely put a link to the Maui Pono organization in the show notes. But I appreciate you talking about that head injury, because that features pretty heavily in Life Akai season 4. And for the listeners who are maybe not familiar with it, can you talk to us about the injury and the process and some of the pretty important development work that you've been doing on the other side of it?
Well, so I think hitting your head is probably the worst thing you could possibly do. Basically your reality is your brain. And I realized that when I hit the bottom. And it's ironic because it was the strongest sort of gut feeling that I ever had, where I've never really used a helmet out at pipe before. I had never even ridden a wave with the helmet on up to that point.
Wow.
And I just had this gut feeling, put the helmet on, and it was during the backdoor shootout, and I was meant to be surfing both the stand-up paddle division and also the surfing division with, Carissa and Kelly and Jamie O'Brien and, all those amazing surfers. I was like looking forward to all that, and I was like, all right, am I going to be that dork on a stand-up at Pipeline wearing a helmet? But I was like, okay, I got to just do it because I just have this really weird feeling. Sure enough, first wave, it was kind of like, 6-footer came in. The swell was just picking up. It was supposed to be 10 foot at the end of the day. And the wind hadn't quite got on it, the morning sickness of pipe. So it kind of hit that sandbar section and clamped really hard. And I was just on that edge of that reef and hit my head on the side, kind of on the temple. All the doctors thought if I didn't have the helmet, it would have killed me, which would have been mildly inconvenient, of course.
Sure.
But so what I learned from all that was on the back end how important your brain is. And we all know that, but I would say we don't put the same effort into training our brain as we do lifting weights for our bodies. And, reading is a great way to exercise your brain, of course, and there's stuff like that. But actually using these kind of advancements in technology, these systems that you can basically strap to your head and it sends electrical pulses, and they could actually read at Brain Health Hawaii. Dr. Kiefer could read all of my previous concussions that I had, and because there's like marks that are sort of left behind. Yeah. And I discovered a lot about my brain. I discovered that the front right side that is kind of responsible for happiness, kind of like, if it's turned off, it could be kind of put you in a depressive state. And it's sort of lingered there for the past 10 years from an accumulative head injury. And I think part of the reason why I got so into big wave surfing was the only way I could bring that level of, I would say, that standard happiness, the standard level everyone operates in, the only way I could get a spike in that area of the brain was to ride something that was maybe life-threatening, really scary. And hence why one wave never satisfied me in big surf. It was always a 12-hour session, and the next day you'd kind of like feel like you had an adrenaline dump. Reality, it was just my brain wasn't processing. And if there's one mantra I can take away from all of that is you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And you'll never know what you never look for. And in this case, it was the biggest blessing to actually have that accident. Of course, it ruined my winter. I was pretty much out of the water, or I could only really surf small waves and missed out on a couple swells. But, it was, for the most part, it was a lucky winter to do it because it wasn't all time, especially after my head injury.
Right.
And so with all that being said, if there's one thing I can encourage everyone to do is go get what's called an EEG scan. And it scans your brain and it tells you how your brain's working. And I think it should be a common practice in all medical checkups anyone does, because like I said, you don't know what you don't know, and maybe you can discover something to make yourself better. And I can understand it could be kind of scary to discover something, but you might as well always persevere and try to improve yourself on a daily basis. And for me, it was the ultimate blessing. And I would say just now I'm starting to really get back to where I was, actually even better. I think I was always operating maybe for the past 10 years at 0.75% of what my brain function should have been. And hopefully by winter I could be closer to 100%.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about not only like pursuing the knowledge of understanding your brain better, but just that insight on like, well, you know, surfing really dangerous waves, really large waves was giving you that adrenaline spike you need. I remember years and years ago, there was a psychologist that was talking about, you know, the connection between like depressive states in action sports athletes. And he said, look, when you study these brains, a lot of it is genetic. And that by that, he kind of meant like, if you go back to their ancestors, like, it's a Darwinism, you know, it's those were the people that were able to like survive hunting mastodons because for whatever reason their brains processed that adrenaline in a way that allowed them to survive. And he goes, so you fast forward to today, and whether it's big wave surfers or, you know, skaters or MX or whatever it is, there is a lot of similarities into that. He said, but at the same time, when you're chasing those highs to stimulate that part of your brain, you are much more susceptible to those lows, and whether it's bipolar, manic depressive, or anything like that. So it's interesting to hear you kind of confirm a version of that where you go, oh, my brain was spiking on getting this. It wasn't just I wanted to ride big waves. It's like my brain needed it.
Yeah, it's totally. Well, it's not that it needed it. It was just like even my reaction to, you know, I thought that ultimate high, that feeling of riding a really big wave, the emotions, the happiness, that was like, it was only reaching to a normal level. And, you know, wasn't going above that. And so that's just how most people always operate. They're kind of like at that area or where you're supposed to be. And I just wasn't. Yeah. And, you know, I was never... And it's funny because you just don't know. You just think everyone's the same as you, but everyone sort of operates a little bit different. And in this case, it was really, gosh, like I didn't know that I was like bummed out, you know, and I was trying to like, I'd maybe put out a face that I was always happy and stuff, but it's because like, well, maybe if I just like, you know, I act this way, this is how I will be, you know, and I'm not saying like I was like curled up in the corner, but it was just like, it's just interesting how checking one little thing out and something that leads you to that could really just end up changing your life and making you better. And I think a lot of maybe my competitive skills as I've gotten older actually got worse, and I almost contributed to like not being totally balanced in the brain and not realizing it. Because when I was younger, I was like kind of thinking back on these memories that I didn't really think about now that I've gotten older, and I was like, gosh, I was quite a lot different back then. Whereas now it's like, you know, even my competitive side, it's not quite the same. And it's not that like, you know, beat somebody at all costs sort of thing. It was just like having the mental fortitude between your ears to just do what needs to be done. And so, yeah, it's really good when, you know, you can find ways in life to just improve yourself, because that's just going to make, you know, your quality of life that much better.
Yeah. And I mean, both pieces feel like it's almost like the modern erasure of the stigma around it. Like, I mean, even the concussion thing in surfing is a fairly like new, like piece of conversation, right? Because people always talk about like, oh, football players or boxers or whatever, you're punch drunk, you get your bell rung. But I mean, we've talked about, you know, Owen Wright with the micro concussions, but all surfers kind of understanding that, look, like we are pushing our bodies, and whether we're hitting the bottom or just the serious pounds per square inch impact of the water hitting your head, it can lead to some really significant, you know, brain issues. And then on the other piece of that too, which you touched on, is just the stigma around mental health. I feel like across all sports is really becoming something that people are comfortable talking about and saying like, I need to take care of myself. I need to understand myself so I can be better, not just for myself, but the people in my life. Yeah,
it's this invisible thing, you know. It's like, I would say we can, I would say, have empathy. It's easier to have empathy towards people when you can see that their arm's clearly broken, or they're cut up, or they're like, you know, there's a physical ailment you can visually see. But when it's all internal, it's hard for people to even like, it's not so much that they wouldn't care about what's going on, but it's hard for them to relate to it because there's not like a visual aspect to it. But that being said, I think more than ever, what people are discovering is that everyone sort of has something that they can improve on in that sort of field. And in the past, you would just try to tough it out. And most people are, I know many people who are totally strong enough to just fight against it. But at the end of this day, do you want to just keep fighting against something constantly? Or, like water, sometimes you need to take the path of least resistance. And in that case, it's kind of like, what's the scariest thing you can do is to A, admit you're wrong, and then, B, acknowledge that something's going on, because it's like, it almost takes away as a male, maybe your masculinity, or it kills the ego. And, on the flip side, what I always liked about big waves was it was an ego killer. You could think you were killing it, you got the best of your life, and a place like Pe'ahi, Jaws, the very next wave could just slap you upside your head and make you realize you're mortal. And so that's like, just admitting to stuff can be a total ego killer. But what it does is it allows the plate to be cleared. And there's not all this stuff that you have to sort of navigate through.
I think people like yourself, and I know like Mick Fanning's and other sort of like people look at it and it's like, if you don't know these people really well, or you don't have the insight into their life, you're like, these guys are like gods. They're tough. They're impenetrable. Like, they're amazing. But having people like you and having people like Mick, again, it really destigmatizes the conversation around mental health, which I think is so important. We are going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we will be right back with the one and only Kai Lenny. All right, we are coming back from break. My name is Dave Prodan. You are here listening to The Lineup with the one and only Kai Lenny. Kai, we've been talking about your fourth season of your web series, The Life of Kai, and we've been talking about just your head injury and mental health, and the idea that these head injuries are not always that obvious. It's not always like someone smashes a board or gets punched in the face. Sometimes they happen in really unique ways, and it's not until much later that we realize we've had one, that we see the impact of that. Can you talk to us about just some of those other instances for you, and maybe some of the less obvious situations that you've been able to have to come through?
Well, it's funny because I think thinking back on my previous concussions, and I think what we didn't realize in big waves that I think we're, more aware of now is all the micro concussions. Every slap on the water, sort of every fall that you have, there's like a tax that is paid. And it's like almost unnoticeable, but over time it can be compounding. And it's this a cumulative thing that initially, actually at the very end of the day, it was the pipe wave that broke the straw on the camel's back. It was like everything leading up to that, everything crumbled. And that's why, my recovery from that was like so bad. It was the worst injury of my entire life. And I don't know if I can even properly describe what a dark place has sent me to for some months. That being said, one of the most bizarre sort of head injuries that I ever had, concussions, was in the final of the 2018 Pe'ahi Challenge. And it was, after the big day before where the contest got canceled, I ended up towing surfing, and it was this really windy final. It was like 12 to 15 foot, couple 18 footers, maybe 20 footer here and there. But it was probably the windiest I'd ever surfed out at Pe'ahi. It was 20 to 30 knots. And the contest, up to that point, I just felt like I had this momentum and it was mine to lose. And in the final, I ended up having a big airdrop falling on my face, which wasn't actually where I got concussed. It was, I got sucked over. And when the waves are smaller at Pe'ahi, a lot of the water draws from the channel, and there's a lot of blue water. And it's ironic because when you surf giant waves, some of the worst wipeouts are on 12 footers, and they're not actually on the 30-foot, monolithic, huge wave that looks more terrifying. So face value, those big waves almost look scarier, but because they're so big, your body sort of fits in the undulations and sort of the cogs of the foam. And so you're so much smaller in that you're not getting tweaked as much, and you're not getting hit as bad because there's a lot more air. The wave is sucking a lot more air from, the sky essentially and pulling it into the water. The smaller waves, there's a lot more blue water. And so when you get trapped in that blue water, it's harder. So when it hits you, it feels like you're really getting punched. And it wasn't me getting an impact. It was actually being in this sort of like crevice in the reef and having all this blue water on top of me. And it was a pressure change from being in aerated water to all of a sudden being many atmospheres deeper. And it felt like I had, in a three-dimensional way, every corner of my head was just getting squeezed. And that change concussed me. And at the time, you're just thinking about competing. You have a lot of adrenaline. I just thought maybe up to that point when I came up, my board was buckled and I had to take it back to the boat to change out. And I could feel myself slipping from having that edge, that fearlessness, that competitiveness, that go on whatever it takes and perform. And throughout that entire final, I was just slowly sliding down this slope. And I ended up getting a nice airdrop with kind of a top turn. And then I ended up getting a barrel. And all that was like in the first half of that heat. And I was like, had this momentum. And from that point, towards the end of the final, I couldn't even paddle for a wave. I lost my mojo almost, like Austin Powers. I just needed to find my mojo again. I couldn't figure out why. And, I ended up getting second in that final. And for a couple days, I had this adrenaline dump. I was super depressed and all this sort of stuff. And I thought I was depressed because I had lost and I was like this close to winning and I just didn't. And then I went and got a, body work done. And that released basically a lot of the tension in my body, which kind of caused the concussion to really go. Right. And from the drive home, which was, 35 minutes from where I lived, where I was at getting the massage, I totally blacked out. And all of a sudden I was home in the driveway and I couldn't remember. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I must have a concussion. And so then I had to take, 3 weeks out of the water just to relax. And at that time, I didn't have the knowledge of Brain Health Hawaii and doing these like different, programs to, help cure your brain. Had I known, I would actually have gone. But I don't even think a lot of that sort of even exists. A lot of this stuff with the brain treatments is quite new. And so all that being said, it's just amazing how like it was just a random, you wouldn't have thought that's how you could get a concussion. It was just like being underwater, not hit by anything, but it was just an atmospheric change.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, it sounds like it's comparable to like sci-fi horror, right? Where like, what are the terrors of space or all these little unknowns? And I think for even most surfers, they probably watch what would have happened to him and be like, oh, he didn't hit the reef, he didn't hit his board, like he popped up, he's fine. But as you said, it's like, the unknowns of being underwater with that blue water and the density and intensity of that blue water squeezing on your head is horrifying in a lot of ways. And something, as you pointed out, there's so many other factors where you can go, am I sad because I lost? Am I a bit banged up because I fell? Like, I don't know. And then, and I think your guidance before of like any surfer, you encouraging them to go get those EEG scans because these things can add up, and the more you know about where you're at, the better you can kind of contend with it.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I mean, you just never know, and things just happen. Accidents happen, and you just kind of got to take the punches as they go. And, life's sort of all about getting back on that horse and doing your best to improve yourself on a daily basis. And, that's how it makes it sort of easy for me to improve as an athlete, is just wanting to find areas that are my weaknesses and improve.
Yeah, no, totally. And you talked about this last injury at Pipe and the straw breaking the camel's back and it putting you in a pretty dark place, probably made all the more complicated by being a relatively new father, which comes with all sorts of other stresses. But I'd imagine too that it's probably a godsend in some ways having kids and having that inspiration and being able to kind of motivate you to work on yourself. Is that a fair assessment?
I think I reached a crossroad where, most fathers do if they're into extreme things is, do you kind of like taper off and you mellow out, or do you kind of double down and keep going hard? And with my daughters, they've been the greatest inspiration. And I look at a lot of the wipeouts that I've had leading up to that pipeline accident. And now when I'm underwater, it's not just fighting for yourself. You're sort of fighting for your kids a little bit. You're like, they're basically the number one thing in your life. And, of course it is my job and stuff, and this is what supports my family. And luckily it's just what I love to do. And they give me that sort of inspiration to keep pushing and getting better. I do know that the last 2 years since I've had my daughters, my training, I've gotten so much more focused. It was like I was almost given this dad superpower to like basically not be afraid to turn over every stone to try to find any weakness so I could be better prepared. And besides the pipeline accident, which there's nothing much you can do to protect your head than just wear a helmet. Like wipeouts that I had out at Pe'ahi and stuff, my confidence and comfortability and the training that led up to it, I feel better than I ever have. And, you can never take for granted any wipeout, but, I just feel like, I was been in the best place I've ever been as an athlete. And, whatever is within my control, I'll be able to do it to the best I could possibly do it. But the thing is, out in the ocean, anything can happen. I mean, you probably more dangerous crossing the street than actually surfing a big wave.
Sure.
But you just don't realize it because it doesn't have that same fear factor of a giant wall of water. And that being said, now the calculation is there a little bit more. It's not just this total death send. Okay, I'm just going to go and see what happens. It's like, okay, I know I can make this. And when I know I can make it, I will make it because I have 100% confidence in it. Whereas if there's like a slight tinge of, I don't think it's going to be sort of doable, I won't go. And, if I end up regretting it, I'll figure out why I didn't go and how I could, better approach it the next time and go for it then. Because at the end of the day, there's always going to be another wave to ride. So there should never be any of this fear of it being your last sort of ride. It's big wave surfing in general has always been kind of an endurance race in a way. The best big wave surfers generally are older.
Right.
And, the guys that do come on the scene pretty hot that are younger, unless they're able to kind of transition that first 2 seasons, sometimes they just, disappear from big wave surfing consistently. And so that's just, even the best guys to this day are still like, sometimes they're in their mid 40s. Shane Dorian was dominating big wave paddle surfing at 45 to almost 50.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if he still wanted to do it, he'd still be the best.
Well, I was going to bring him up because this was a pretty important topic of conversation that he and I had on the podcast too, which was the idea, and obviously you guys are at different stages of your careers, but he's been pretty public about this, about making a decision to kind of step away from full throttle pushing the limits. And he's so into, probably similarly to yourself, like physical fitness, mental fitness, everything else, preparedness, and just making that calculation of, at some point, there is a final chapter in you going as hard as you can in waves that size. And is this something you've considered at all? Obviously, again, you guys are at different points in your career, but I'm curious.
I mean, when you're first coming into it, you're like, I'm going to be riding a 50-foot wave, even if I have to get towed in at 70 years
Forever,
old,
right, yeah.
Forever. And then I think as you kind of like, I've been, surfing big waves for a while now. Consistently every season since 2009.
Yeah.
And here out at Pe'ahi and Jaws, and that's evolved surfing around the world when there was a world tour to now when it's just strike missions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you sort of do, I think, understand that there might just be that one day where you're like, I've done enough.
Right.
And it's kind of scary to think about still, because like, you want to believe that your life's eternal and goes forever, but that's just not the way life is. And it's a beautiful thing to kind of cross into different chapters, and you commit to each chapter. I think the last thing you want to do is be hanging on to the past when the times are changing. And I don't think I'm close to that point, but I respect someone like Shane Dorian who left basically on top and is still the standard. His waves, his best rides are still, pretty much unrivaled. There's probably a few rides that stick out here and there, but, for the longest time he was the king, and, he kind of still is. And until maybe someone is consistently doing something better than him, he'll still remain on top, I think. And so, all that being said, I think one day you kind of realize that, like, I did it, and now it's maybe my turn to support the next generation. And look at Shane's down at Teahupo for the Olympics, And
Totally.
he's probably the single most qualified person to coach anyone out at Chopu, because he's ridden the biggest waves there. He's paddled the biggest waves. He's been going there for, the entire 21st century, and maybe even a little before. So it's pretty cool. And I could see that point where you want it. If the next generation isn't pushing the limits and isn't better than the generation previously, then I think you're witnessing the sport in decline or dying.
Yeah.
It's healthy for a sport to have people that are better every generation. And it doesn't people would, I would say, consider that taking away from, the guys that did it previous, like, oh, they weren't as good, but they were kind of paving the road. They were trying to develop and find out what's possible. And when you reflect on what Shane did, alongside with a few others like Ian Walsh,
Sure.
they proved you could actually paddle these giant waves that were toe only for a long time. And then before that, with Laird and Dave Kalama, Rush Randall, the strapped crew, they were proving you could actually survive these big waves.
Right.
And they were doing it without inflation vests. They were doing it for most of their career board shorts. And thinking back on how gnarly that is, like, they got that sport to such a high level that is still, there's still a top level if they were to ever go back out there.
Right.
But that's every generation is pushing the needle forward. And then the next generation can just start from the front of the line, with better equipment, better knowledge, better support. So yeah, that's all being said. I always admire legends that give back to the kids and, want to see kids take it to the next level. And I feel very lucky to have been mentored by many of these legends. And even if it's not like them telling me exactly what to do, just being around them is enough to leave an indelible mark on a young kid.
Totally. And I loved your comment on, like, the immortality complex that we all have when we're younger. I won't tip people in with names. I'll tell you offline here in the break. But a surfer we both know very well is very, very close, if not best friends, with another surfer we both know very well. And I remember years ago, I was with him and he said, oh, so-and-so is the first surfer ever who truly believes they're going to live forever. And he goes, he's not going to, but I'm happy to watch. And I was like, I kind of laughed at that. I was like, that's a good point.
Sometimes you kind of need that, I don't even want to call it delusion, but you kind of need that faith in yourself.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Or you need that, borderline narcissism to be able to do what's never been done. And I think that's why a lot of sometimes the best athletes, and you can reflect outside of surfing to, like, even a Michael Jordan, if you've watched The Last Dance,
right.
He was a very curt, kind of hard on his teammates guy, but at the same time, he was the absolute best. And, to the rest of us watching, he seemed like, he was the best spokesman there could have possibly be. But it really kind of takes that mindset, and it might come off as like rude or harsh. And I think maybe Laird got that rap a lot, but
sure.
Many, and even Kelly for sure too. Like, does he have emotions towards other people? But you cannot be the best towards what you're trying to accomplish if you're not willing to kind of sacrifice everything and yourself. Like, you have to be willing to sacrifice a lot. And no, 99.9% will not understand. The ones that do understand there's like a forgiveness towards it. It's like, oh, of course, it's the only way you can maybe reach that pinnacle in your time. And I'd say probably the thing that holds everyone back, especially people who should have been champions, who maybe didn't, get to where everyone thought they'd arrive to. It was just the lack of confidence in themselves. And
that's a great point.
Most the best champions are very blessed in a way that they're born with that self-confidence. It's just like a baseline. Not all of us sort of are. And so you gotta either work really hard to fake it till you make it, learn it, but you can never kind of outdo somebody that feels it in their soul, and that takes a special individual. And it's every champion you've ever seen, that's what they have. And that's the talent that they carry more than anyone. It's not like the actual physical ability to do it. It's their self-belief. That's, the saying goes in endurance sports that I participated in, is you'd rather be undertrained than overtrained. And a lot of people will overtrain to compensate for a lack of confidence. And some of the most confident racers will actually tend to undertrain a little bit because their confidence is so high in their ability that confidence allows them to arrive to the place that they need to be to win. And that's, it all comes down to those little moments. And that's when your confidence gets you over that edge. Big waves, confidence to push you over that ledge and trust that you'll be good no matter what, even if you might not be.
That's such an interesting insight. And it's a good segue too, because I actually think similarly to Shane, like Shane was such a standard in big wave surfing for so long, but it wasn't his only discipline. And similarly to you, like you're a fantastic surfer outside of, I'd put it in civilian waves, right? And you also have all these other disciplines. So if you do get to the point where you're like, well, look, I feel good. I've accomplished what I want in this part of my career. I feel like you have so many other avenues to pursue. And this kind of bleeds into that conversation on family as well, because you mentioned that you just got back from a month in Bali. What was that like? And I think you were spending some time with your brother-in-law, whom we'd love to get on the podcast at someday, Dusty Payne as well, which different kind of surfing than what we've been talking about.
Well, there's this funny, because when I was growing up, just to kind of roll back a little bit, I'm just a true product of my environment. Before there was social media and we were only living off magazines. And of course, as a kid, especially in my era, late 90s, early 2000s, your heroes are Andy and Kelly. But, they seem like in a different planet, a different world, because the North Shore, while it's only 150 miles away from here in a 30-minute flight, it's still separate. It felt so far away from Maui. And, I was really affected by the people around me. And I was just taught to kind of do all these different sports because that's what these guys were doing. They were riding big waves in the winter. They were windsurfing because it was windy here. They were always innovating because of all the different sports. That led me to a point where I think there was this brief window where I was probably the best at a lot of these sports for a really brief moment. And now so many of this next generation of kids are coming up that are, they do everything and they might be even a little more focused on one particular discipline.
Right.
And, I definitely feel like a jack of all the trades and a master of none. Within each discipline, there's definitely better guys than me. I've always been into riding waves because I love the sensation of riding waves. It brings me a true happiness that's maybe only second to the love you get when you hug and kiss your child. Right. And with all that being said, I think maybe what's held me back on a competitive level, what maybe held me back in my career, which was also a blessing within my career too, is, I think what made me unique and why I have such great support and sponsors was that I do everything. Right. But to not be like consistently winning world championships in the hardest sports sort of thing, and I did consider it maybe 4 years ago of just kind of like going full tilt into shortboarding. And I would say my run into it was a little late because maybe I didn't have that same skill set some time ago because I was diluting myself with trying to compete as a windsurfer, doing stand-up paddling, trying to innovate sports, participate in just about everything. I realized that actually maybe a year ago that I was like, what am I doing? Like, I won't be able to, I don't think I could give up everything that I love to do that much to pursue it. And I know deep down in my heart, if I did commit to it 100% and maybe moved off Maui and spent a lot of time in California and Australia and just dug my heels into it, it'd probably take 2 or 3 years if everything went perfectly. But you could maybe arrive at a WCT level. And unfortunately, I don't know, maybe that's my weakness, is not being able to commit to just one thing. And I find myself diverted into many different directions, and gives me a great life, of course. But then there's always that lingering question that maybe most athletes have, is like that what if you did something?
Totally. And it's that very it's so appropriate across all sports right now, like that specialist versus generalist debate, and John Florence, he's on, I think, next week's podcast. He and I were talking about this just in terms of how intense the level's gotten on the CT since he started. And he started, back in 2011. I started traveling back in 2006 just as an observer. But we were saying, hey, look, like when he started, he was like, yeah, people would go out and people would like, eat pizzas and people would have generally a good time. And then they'd turn up and they'd perform. And there was something from an observer standpoint that was really special about that, because I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm not advocating for that way of life, but these were very human people that were living very human lives that were then coming out and doing something superhuman in the ocean, compared to now where he's like, everyone measures how much they eat and everyone's got a trainer and everyone gets 200 boards that all look the same every year. And it's just these degrees of difficulty and these degrees of difference that people are trying to get out of it. And I get it. Like the performance is lifted for sure. I'm talking about surfing. But at the same time, you kind of lose the fun, like different points of view. And I would say that just as a fan of your own surfing in civilian conditions, I think so much of it's informed by all the other things you do. And it makes it really special in a way that's not as homogenized as it would have been otherwise.
I mean, I see the benefit of doing everything that I've done, especially in big waves.
Right.
In big waves, I think that's why I consider riding big waves maybe the pinnacle of what I do. And it perhaps has a bunch of different things. One, it requires such a commitment, but two, you don't get to do it every single day.
Sure.
Surfing normal waves is something that I can go do every single day. And I'm actually more of a small wave surfer than a big wave surfer, because I just don't get to surf big waves as much as I get to surf small waves. So I'm a big wave surfer sometimes, but the comfort I've gotten from traveling really fast across the water on a windsurf board and turning a big board, the comfort I've gotten from the endurance, strength, the resilience to continue going after a big wipeout, from stand-up paddle racing, endurance training, channel crossings, you getting used to riding up to a 17-foot long open ocean board, or in general just a big board. And kite surfing, you get comfortable flying through the air and being really high in the air. And so and with foiling too, you get comfortable, not actually having the board touch the water, but just floating through the air and tapping into a deeper source of the wave. There's so many little things that I draw on, and I think that's what's led to certain performances that I've had in big waves, the success I've had in with, winning awards and the occasional contest here and there.
Yeah.
That's where I've seen the biggest benefit. And perhaps that's always been sort of like my true path, was to take all these things that I do and ride big waves and do it the best way I can. But it's, there's something always tantalizing about something that you don't have going on in your life and you wish. It's sort of like you watch a movie and maybe sometimes you wish you were an actor in that movie, or like, what would it be like to be a part of that? I'm not saying that was necessarily me, but I'm just trying to generalize the idea of like, I get to watch the WCT every single event, have a fantasy team, and you're just into it like a fan.
Yeah.
And you're always like, gosh, what would it be like to arrive there? And I'm blessed to have had the opportunity to be in that realm as a wild card. And while I don't think I was able to surf at the level I should have been to actually do a really good push, I can understand the commitment. And the best part about actually putting on that jersey and being out there is, by the end of the event, you may never know if you ever get another opportunity, but you realize what the next big step might be.
Right.
And as a competitor and somebody who's always trying to turn over every stone to figure out how to innovate a sport or just get better, after competing out at Sunset, you're like, man, if I just had known what I know now after my heat before, and I trained this way and I worked on my equipment and I did this, I would have had a better shot the next time. And you know what? You got to hand it to everyone that commits themselves to a regional, QS campaign, to a challenger campaign, who eventually make it to the CT and earn it. And luckily I have like some of my closest friends that I grew up here on Maui that have and are on the WCT.
Yeah.
And so in some way I got a little window to peek in, and, I can't tell them what I think they should be doing because they made it there on their own, but it's really fun to sort of almost fantasize like, okay, like in their position, what would they do? Because there's like a little connection. And I kind of discovered that from doing it myself.
Yeah.
So, you're talking about like everyone training. It's gone, and I don't know if surfers like this comparison, but it's gone quite Formula One.
Sure.
And similar to like how sailing was an old man's yachtsman sport. You could be out of shape and you just kind of set your tack and you go on a reach for an hour before you have to, jibe or tack the other direction. The sailing is the same thing. I've got to visit these places and I'm seeing a trend that surfing's following without realizing it. I think the next big step that everyone's going to take within surfing is trying to figure out not the shapes of their boards, but it's really the construction of their equipment.
Right.
And that's going to lead to bigger gains in their performances. Not necessarily like that they're going to be that much better, but they're going to be that much more consistent. And consistency truly wins any event, tour or whatever. Even on a finals day, being able to be that comfortable with a board that maybe you snapped a week earlier, but you got a replica of. And right now it's tremendously difficult to get a replica. Just talking to the best CT guys, they'll order 10 boards, keep 2, and then their shaper will sell the rest. And you're like, no normal surfer will be able to tell the difference between them, but they're so in tune. So that's what I think the future of the boards are. The shapes, they're pretty much there. It's all personal preference. But the construction, that's where Formula One and America's Cup have taken their sports to the next level.
Oh, it's such a good point. It's one of my perverse pleasures, the amount of times I've seen CT surfers get a quiver of 10 boards that are all identical, right? And to even like high-level surfers, you're like, there's no difference. And they will sit there and they'll go, yes, no, yes, yes, no. And they're like, it's just these tiny little vibrations that got a little too much glass on that edge, like concave's a little uneven here. And it's like, how can you sense that? But it's just, I guess, masters of a craft. Like you're that in tune with your equipment, regardless of what the discipline is.
Well, the funniest thing about that is I always believed that, okay, John or Gabriel or any one of the best surfers on earth that's on a CT level, they could probably just ride whatever and look amazing. Like you could have a board you consider as a bad board and they could hop on it and do turns you couldn't do airs that you couldn't leave the water with. And you're like, how are they doing it? Because they're that good. But then again, when it comes to them trying to like take every bit of advantage they can kind of get to beat their, competitor, they're so tied into their equipment that something we wouldn't notice, they absolutely notice. Or some normal thing that, it's those, and they just pick it up and feel it on their arm. And truly, I'd say that it sounds crazy, but you can feel if it's a good board or bad under your arm. Like you really can. But that's the funny thing is I think that's a confidence thing. It comes back to the confidence thing.
Right.
I feel like someone like Gabriel Medina can honestly just surf anything, and he sometimes does. You know, sometimes his boards, haven't looked the best in him, but he somehow just makes it work. And then, John, I don't think anyone can really ride John's boards because they're so made towards him and his style. And his style is uniquely skate within surf. The way he drops his front arm and the way he approaches. And it's not to say that those shapers, aren't the best shapers in the world because they've been proved, time and time again with their other riders. But these other CT guys like the Gabes and the Johns, and I'm missing a bunch of others, but they are so tuned in what they need and what they want and how they surf that their boards are just tuned towards them. Similar to like, you can't just hop in a Formula One car and expect to drive it because the RPMs are so high and you have to go so fast just to shift a gear. That's their boards. Their boards probably don't work until you're going really, really fast. And most people need boards that are designed to work at a slower speed. And then when they go too fast, it can feel squirrely. But these CT guys, you surf with them and they're always going, I swear, 10 miles an hour faster than the best guy that's out there that isn't on the CT.
That's such a good point. I love that F1 comparison. I always say the same thing. Like the webcast doesn't do how like the men and women on tour justice because we're all armchair critics. We'll watch, we'll look at the rankings.
Why
we'll
did they go that way?
Yeah, we're like, that guy or girl down the bottom of the rankings. Like the guy at my local's as good as them. And then you see it live and you're like, that's the fastest surfer I've ever seen in my life. And it's like...
Well, I know the criticism around the Final Five and, how Trestles is boring and, it's the wave is slow, it's not pipe. And I kind of understand that and agree with a lot of the points. But last year, I just went to go watch the finals just for fun. And, I went with Peter King, who's just like the king of commentary. And we stood on the furthest rock out at all day, probably like the 5 hours that there were heats, and we were sandwiched between maybe the Griffin San Clemente crowd and
Right, yeah.
you know, the Felipe Toledo crowd on the left, and then you know, the Ethan Ewing crowd and Caroline Marks, Carissa, whatever. So we were in it, but watching them at Trestles in person was the most exciting thing I could ever imagine. Why I ended up standing on a slippery rock as far out as I could for 5 hours and got severely sunburned, surprisingly, even though I'm from Hawaii. It was like so fun to watch in person because video does not do these guys surfing justice. And I mean, we're talking about how I was just in Bali, full circle here, and I was with Dusty Payne,
Yeah, yes.
who's my brother-in-law somehow. And we were surfing the wave that, you know, kind of made those modern films like Modern Collective by Kai Neville, the wave yo-yos. One of the best airwaves ever. The sections were so big and so gnarly and to the flats, and you watch clips from it, and I didn't really get all the clips I wanted because it was that gnarly. Yeah. It was just the landings were psycho. But you watch the videos, you're like, that's the best airwave, that's so easy. And I was watching Dusty in person, huge full rotations, stomping turns, and I'm like, dude, if this guy put an ounce of effort back into it, he's a CT surfer. He was literally out surfing me every wave, and I mean, it was fine, but you want to surf with people that are better than you so you can maybe get a little better yourself. And so, like, that being said, you know, Dusty's still surfing at a CT level, but you see the difference when those guys are out there. And for even how they catch waves, like, they'll sit where they're like halfway in the channel, and a perfect wave will come to them every time, and you're like, what? And they're not battling with the 40 other guys that are at the peak. But they end up getting waves that look taller and bigger, and they're just that tuned in, and it's just super sick to see.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, like the opportunity to see the CT up close is a wild card, but also just in your own life, like Dusty Payne, outside of being a CT level surfer, is someone who's been considered on the bleeding edge of performance surfing for so long. So getting to surf with him outside of a jersey is probably another inspiration for you to take into your own everyday surfing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any opportunity I get to surf with Dusty, and, you know, he lives right above Honolulu Bay, and, you know, I get to surf with him there out there a lot. And, you know, if a contest ever ended up coming there with the best in the world, I think it'd be probably between him and Ian Gentile out there. They're just so dialed in on that wave. But, you know, yeah, in order to get better, you should always surf with better surfers than yourself. And it's just inspiration. And then you watch them do the impossible, and you're like, why do I even need foot straps on my board when they can do it without it, you know? And of course, it's like something you have to work towards. But yeah, it's always inspiring. I mean, it's funny because at night, you know, I could watch Modern Collective and watch Dusty from 15 years ago, and then I can, you know, go watch him in person.
It rules. We're going to take one more quick break, and when we come back, we will wrap up our conversation with Maui's Kai Lenny. We'll be right back. All right, we are back. This is the Lineup Podcast. I'm Dave Prodan here with Maui's Kai Lenny. Kai, this has been such an interesting conversation on so many levels. You talked about, you know, the injury this year kind of taking you off the playing field in terms of big wave surfing, but something that has been coming up on the WSL side of things is that the seasons the last few years, when you look at Piahi, they haven't been overly kind in terms of a lot of great days out there, a lot of great, for us, like ability to run events. And you mentioned it before, you were a big wave surfer, but you can't plan that as a career, and you can't guarantee when that's going to happen. So how do you kind of approach your career in 2024 with that in mind?
You know, it's really interesting because, the Piahi Jaws Challenge hasn't ran for 5 years. Could it be 6 years this year? I'm not sure. And, you know, we have days. It's really hard to sometimes predict because on the forecast, it could say one thing and then the swell could arrive and it could be great. But, you know, are you going to, you know, risk running an event when it's probably going to be 25 knots, but then it ends up being only 10 knots? And that's just Mother Nature. That's our small, you know, sort of island. We have that Venturi effect from the island, and it makes the winds quite unpredictable, and it strengthens the winds from that travel across the Pacific and on and on. I think the biggest solution for big wave events moving forward for everything is you go and try to run an event as a paddle event, and you commit to a swell, because there's always going to be at least 4 swells per season. And if you show up and it's bad, everyone grab a tow board and let's just put on a show and ride big waves.
Right.
And there's that core aspect, and I understand, like, no, we got to only paddle. But at the end of the day, if we want to run events every single year, and I think it would be right to be able to, like, balance between the two. And whereas, paddling is about that bravado and charging and the takeoff, and, kind of in a way borderline surviving a giant barrel, tow and surfing is the high performance aspect. It's like, all right, of course the drop's never going to be as gnarly as paddling, but you can make it as gnarly as you want. There's an 8-second barrel out of Pe'ahi no one's tapped into yet, because for one, it's terrifying, but you could get barreled from North Peak to the end and be in the barrel for 8 seconds. And right now, maybe people get the longest ever is like a 3-second tube. And so I look at it from that perspective. If we want events to run more often, and it's all cyclical too. I mean, the last 5 years have been very windy. And to be honest, when I'm out at Jaws, like, I go out there with my paddle stuff and I get a couple sessions and then the wind comes up and it's too dangerous to paddle, or it's just, not really worth the risk. You're not even catching waves. You catch one wave in 4 hours. I just want to ride big waves. So I go and tow in and I shift my focus to performance. How hard can I turn? What kind of airs can I do down the face on chops, or can I hit the lip? How long of a barrel can you get, And there's like little aspects, and I see that being the future of big wave events, because no matter what, you can always tow anything. And if the swell looks big enough, just go. And, honestly, I think every 5 years a cycle sort of changes, and we may be fortunate this whole next season is no wind. And it's just perfect for paddling, and you could have ran 5 Pe'ahi events, So it's just, that's the nature of big waves. How do you control big waves? That it's a beast that's uncontrollable. You just kind of got creative how we approach it. If we want it to be, a competitive playing field that is consistent, and it's hard to garner support, from non-endemic sponsors, even endemic sponsors, if it's not running every year, and you're like, well, our window's from October to March. It could run, but it might not. And you should sponsor this event because it hasn't ran in the last 5 years. You're like, oh, come on, this is the year, let's do it.
It's tricky. I like your approach on just adaptability, because it's like, I think, especially with big wave surfing, I would say all kinds of surfing, regardless of discipline, the best kind of competitive product is the one that's closest to the actual community. So for something like big wave, like in yourself, it's like, we're going to do our best to be as prepared as possible for these swells. And if I can paddle it, I'll paddle it. If I can tow it, I'll tow it. Do you think there's a number of other big wave surfers that approach not just competition, but just chasing swells in that way, where they bring equipment to paddle and equipment to tow?
I think in the last 4 years, that's become quite a standard of the consistent big wave surfer.
Right.
If I'm going to name a few, of course, Lucas Chumbo. He'll paddle the biggest wave on earth, or he'll tow it. He even prefers probably towing a little more, because it gives him the ability to ride more waves and do turns that are similar to a 6-foot wave. And but when you show up to places now, like Mavericks was an only paddle wave.
Right.
But now when you show up, everyone always has their tow board on the boat. Just in case it's not good for paddling, everyone just tows. And that's the locals too, So, I mean, the traveling big wave surfers are consistently, and Lucas Chumbo, Ian Walsh, Jojo, Jamie Mitchell, there's just like a list of guys that they're always kind of showing up with stuff. And that's smart. That's what I've been doing as long as I could. And I sometimes reflect on I shouldn't have been promoting it that much, because I used to have it by myself when it would be tow only. And that being said, I even consider if you're doing a Chopu contest, and I'm not saying maybe for the CT in this case, but just a contest out there in general, like it becomes tow, just throw the guys a rope and see who's going to go deepest. I mean, it's still psycho gnarly to tow in out there, and you can see even the best guys out there are constantly adjusting their lines because of the vortex and that suction off the reef. And, on the CT side of things, I always thought we should actually change the Pe'ahi big wave event to just a floating CT event during the Hawaiian season. And you don't have to run it when it's 30 foot. Run it when it's 15 to 20 feet. It's super approachable. And the reason my thoughts on that is because, for one, now the next generation of girls like Erin Brooks, Sierra Kerr, and Molly Picklums, Caity Simmers as well.
Sure.
They all charge waves that are absolutely out of control. I saw a photo of, Erin Brooks recently towing a 12 to 15 footer at Chopu like it was nothing, and she's like this tall, 16 years old.
Yep.
And then Sierra Kerr charging 10 footers with her dad down in Indonesia and Mentawais.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's the thing. The best big wave surfers have always sort of been the best small wave surfers. John Florence wins the Eddy. Right. Barely surfs big waves unless it's convenient for him and he's not conflicted with a tour event. Right. Kelly Slater doesn't really surf big waves. Automatically one of the best. Won the Eddy. Albie Laird, known for being one of the best air guys in the world. Also probably one of the best top 3 guys out at Pe'ahi.
Good point.
And
these are great
points. Shane Dorian, number 2 in the world. Won many CTs, won bells. I mean, best big wave paddle surfer there ever was. Ian Walsh, start off small wave surfer, one of the best big wave surfers still to this day. Lucas Chumbo rips in small waves. So that being said, you get the best surfers on earth. If you give them a reason to go surf big waves, they're gonna be the best. I mean, nowadays some of the best pipe surfers are the CT guys, whereas I think in the past the best pipe guys were the pipe guys, and they're still insane. Right. Yeah. But what the CT guys have that most locals don't is the competitive fortitude and skill in that area, and they're going to go on any wave that comes in. I mean, look at Italo. He was going to be pigeonholed as this small wave surfer that, should have been never good at pipe. Ends up winning pipe and the world title. The best way you could win a world title. Yeah. And so I think if there was an event like that where guys and girls had to grab their 9.0s, and we would see big wave surfing take leaps and bounds bigger. I think, the backside surfing out at Pe'ahi paddling could be pushed to the next level, and you could see longer barrels because you could actually really pig dog. And I just visualize Gabriel Medina going backside out there and just like pig dogging 20 footers, and they'd give them 2 seasons and they'd automatically be the best in the world out there. And then the next opportunity Fiji ever becomes that code red swell,
Right, yeah.
First thing and that's the most perfect big wave there is. Everyone's grabbing 9.0s and they're just hucking themselves and they're doing the impossible. So for me, maybe even if the event doesn't run, it's just a floating event. It adds a little bit of fear, and we all agree that the best surfers should be able to surf 2 foot to big waves. And widely regarded why John is considered the best surfer in the world, because he's the best from, 2 foot to 50 foot.
I love it. I love that idea.
So I'm throwing it out there. Hopefully everyone backs me on that.
Yeah, everyone on this podcast backs you on that. I'm into it.
Okay. Yeah, there we go.
We've taken up so much of your time. We got a few more pieces. Season 4 of Life of Kai is out now. It's awesome. We encourage all the listeners to check it out. Is season 5 in the planning stages, in the filming stages? And if so, what can people expect?
Well, of course, it was really awesome with season 4 to be able to reflect on the injuries and kind of like go into a deeper sense of what's made me who I am, and how, there's kind of behind the curtain look of what these injuries can do. And hopefully someone that's watching it, if they've had similar situations as to what I've gone through, they can learn something from it. And at the end of the day, I just always hope that everyone's thoroughly entertained by watching the life of Kai, I mean, to me, it all seems so exciting because I get to do it. But whether people think it's great or not, it's up to them. I'm really looking forward to this next winter because I want to come out and have the best winter I possibly can, because I feel like, maybe I paid my dues a little bit with this injury and missing out on a good half. And I've got a lot of, good travel ideas and places that I want to visit and performances that I want to test myself doing. And so, that being said, I think you can expect a lot in the future. Hopefully the best, has yet to come. And I just appreciate everyone supporting me and giving me, the support that allows me to have these sponsors, this platform, and to continue living this dream. Because I know something like this doesn't last forever, but it's one of those things you find yourself in this opportunity. You want to ride that wave as long as you can.
Oh, we're all the beneficiaries of it. So thank you for that. Before you go, we did put in a prompt to the folks who follow us at the Lineup Pod on Instagram. We got a lot of questions back, but we've got 3 for you. First question is from Avant Surfwax, who asks, what is the best thing about having twins?
I mean, the best thing about having twins is it makes, riding big waves seems super mellow. It's 100% on. Everyone out there that has kids knows this. You're 100% on. I think the difference between having like 1 to 2 is 2, it's always double overhead. And when one's asleep, the other's awake. And,
Sure.
Most recently did, that 16 and a half hour flight with twins from Indonesia, just one of the flights. And, it takes on a different approach to how you travel. And, they keep me humble, totally. Sure. But they're also my biggest inspiration because I see how much they're learning and stuff. And it's almost really, it is a rebirth. And they're too young for it now, but I think the best sessions that are ahead of me is the days that they're going to wake me up super early and say, Dad, we want to go dawn patrol. And I'm like, you're speaking my language. And it's like getting to go through the joys of relearning how to do everything that you've been doing for so long. And that's what's going to make surfing even more special than it already is.
Great answer. Next question is from David Balefuss, who asks, are there any ocean activities that you do not like?
It's really challenging. I like everything that I think, every sport that's sort of out there kind of serves as like something that is a unique challenge. Looks also, it comes down to actually just time. How much time are you able to put into something? And part of the reason why I'm probably not better in one single sport is because, you end up doing one sport and then the next session you're like, wow, the conditions look great for this. I'm going to do that.
Right.
Or the next day you're not consistent in your training as just a maybe small wave surfer. It's like, well, it actually looks good for foiling, so I'm going to go foil or, winging or whatever it might be. And I think one sport I haven't really done or committed myself to is you grow up bodyboarding, of course, but you watch the Hubbards and, Mike
Right.
Stewart and all the best bodyboarders in the world. And what they do is just absolutely out of this world. And I've always had this sort of like goal to spend some time to be able to do those big flips and to do what they do. And it's just another perspective. Recently kind of got into body surfing a lot more, and the next logical step is to maybe bodyboard a little bit, especially these slab waves. I've been talking to Nathan Florence about it. I'm like, you should bring a bodyboard with you when you go places, because if it's too nuts to paddle, maybe just try bodyboarding a couple, just for fun. But then that being said, also, what's crazy is, the wave ski kayakers. Yeah. I think they probably are the lowest on the totem pole of respect in any surf lineup, but I've seen those guys properly rip and do airs and turns, and I don't know, I'm open-minded to just everything. And if it's fun and, you're not affecting anyone in a negative way, then why not try it? So yeah, there's not one sport that I'm down on. It just comes down to how much time I'm willing to put out there. And I guess at this point I have so many sports on my, plate that are really good for me in my backyard that I end up kind of doing that, but I'm willing to try anything.
I liked what you said about perspective too, where it's this will be an interesting perspective that I'll learn something new and I can apply that to the rest of it. So great question. Last one from the folks at the Lineup Pod is from WillyGoat0230, who says, Che boys, Kai, terms of progression, what is next? Hopefully you understood the first bit there.
I think, for progression, it just depends on what you're talking about. I think if we're talking about, let's say, the equipment side of surfing, the future of surfing's construction and the boards, and it doesn't sound that exciting, but, I've been really working hard on experimenting with different carbons and finding flexes and actually replicating the exact feeling of a PU board. That is the standard. The bummer of the PU board and most CT surfers, which I'm talking CT surfers because they're the benchmark on performance, right, is they might do 2 or 3 sessions before they snap a board. And that's just, we're using technology that Greg Knoll was, glassing his boards for Waimea Bay. Obviously even thinner, so they break even quicker. But just from spending time in Formula One, or around Formula One rather, and America's Cup, you can make carbon flex the same way anything you want. It's all about tuning. Obviously, It takes a lot of effort and money and all that, but there's no reason why we can't make an indestructible board that'll outlive us all while performing exactly how you want it, which is the standard of the PU. And I figure if we could get a carbon board that'll last the test of time, we're gonna be able to figure out how to make it even better than a PU. But the PU is the standard, so right now it's just about getting to that point. And then it's progression in big wave surfing. Paddle and surfing, it's going to be about who can ride smaller boards, take off under the lip more, who's going to be able to get longer barrels. I think that's just standard. I think actually the progression of performance as an athlete, I think the future is switch surfing. I genuinely believe that if maybe not this next generation, but the generation afterwards, everyone's gonna be able to switch a surf on the highest level possible, like be equally as good either way. Because while watching the finals, the final five with Carissa and Caroline, it was evident to me that the reason why Carissa lost was because as a frontside surfer, really hard to go ultra vertical. And while the judges are always looking for vertical turns, if you're surfing a hurricane swell and it's at Trestles and it's kind of bent out of sea, all your wrap turns tend to start looking like cutbacks. Right. And Carissa would get one first good turn, and then the second turn it would look like a cutback. She was still wrapping it and doing the best she could. Caroline backside, she was coming up pretty horizontal, but at the last second she could put the board up, send spray vertical.
Little pivot, yeah.
And as a competitor, I see that as like, I'm going to read the wave to what's the best thing I can do on this wave. Right now, it's, okay, I can do turns. I'm going to go for an air. An air is going to get me a big score if I need it, a clutch moment. But in this case, it's like, okay, I've given the judges my front side surfing. I'm going to give them backside surfing on a right. And I think that's really the future of surfing. It's also going to be a lot healthier on people. A lot of people end up having back problems, hip problems. And I've been learning how to switch surf again. And the hardest thing I discovered was that my body was so fixed to being like comfortable at regular foot. I was actually getting more tight and having like more soreness and actually like almost hurt from going switch and unwinding years of stuff because my body was getting confused. And maybe the hardest thing has been trying to learn how to tuck my back leg in on either stance. I've been getting a little more bow stance because your front foot tends to have to be kind of bowed open. Right. And that just takes time to kind of like really teach yourself. But I've been stretching the most I've ever stretched in my life. I stretch 3 times a day, probably 20 to 30 minutes at a time to try to like, unwind everything I've done, but then optimize my body to actually work. And I feel better. But if a kid starts surfing switch from immediately, they won't actually have to deal with all that sort of stuff. But it's actually been an interesting quest. And I think for me, the straw that broke the camel's back, that quote, is when I was surfing Nazare in the contest, as a backsider, regular foot, you can't see the wave barreling. And I was always frustrated because you'd have, Lucas and Pedro Scooby and a few others getting barreled at Nazare. And as a backsider, you're like, I can't do it because I can't see the wave. You're blind. And the wave's so tall and there's no wall. It's just a mountain. They end up, the way they get barreled is they're goof foot and they can look back over their left shoulder and look back at it. But as a backsider, you can't turn your head and you don't want to be looking straight back because you're not seeing the chop in front of you. So there's like, to me, I was like, gosh, my goal is just to be able to go switch in big waves because it actually might be safer than being backside sometimes. And, I got a couple waves at Chopu the last time I was there, switch and regular. And I actually found I was much preferred to be frontside. Whereas I always heard in the past, you'd rather be backside out there towing. Right. But no one truly knows because everyone has their fixed stance. But yeah, it was really interesting. I was like, okay, I think, big barreling waves, you kind of always just want to be facing the wave unless you're paddling and you're grabbing the rail.
That's a great answer. Well, thank you to everyone that wrote in at the Lineup Pod, and thanks to Kai for answering those questions. We are now down to our final segment. It's one that you've hit before back in February 2020. It's time for the lightning round. So these are 10 questions for you to answer as quickly as you can. We'll see how consistent your answers are with last time.
Oh, no.
If you could only have one board for the rest of your life, single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad bonzer, or finless, what would you choose?
Probably a quad, and it would be like a board that I could surf everything in. Because you can surf a big board in small waves. But at the end of the day, let's say Jaws gets good, I could ride a 8.8 out in small waves and have fun, and then I could also go ride a 25-foot barrel out of Jaws on it if I really had to. And a quad is kind of preferred for speed and all range sizes, and also the windsurf style, which is like smaller fronts and bigger back fin.
Okay, that's consistent. Very good. Coffee or tea?
Neither. I just don't drink any of it. I think if I had to choose one, if I was sick, probably tea. If I just, I don't know, for some reason want to drink coffee for energy, but I wake up with a ton of energy. I just don't drink that stuff really.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito. I mean, standard. It's like the most convenient. It's actually probably the most perfect food transferable system of contents. You can hold it. I've had it in the water. I could, it's like nothing falls out. Sandwich is flawed because there's areas around it things can fall out of, but not that. I mean, of course, a pizza, it's really good too, but it's a little bit too much bread.
I'm with you. I like the way you approach that question. I'm a burrito guy. Last book you read?
What was the last book I read? I think it was it might have been, gosh, it's been a minute, I guess. The Gunslinger,
Okay.
the Gunslinger series. That was probably like my favorite last book I read. I think I've read other stuff between now and then, but it was like, that one was a fun journey, the first book.
Yeah, good answer. Best surf film ever?
That's really hard. It just depends on what kind of surf film. If you just wanted like pure action, I mean, it's very hard to look any further than maybe the old Taylor Steeles, but then, A Modern Collective was like a shift in, kind of the modern music editing, and then the surfing was just out of this world. But when it comes to like, I think documentary stuff, I was just heavily inspired by Riding Giants. And it comes back to, where I'm from, from Hawaii. Jaws in my backyard. Laird was like one of my heroes, and the history of big wave surfing. That's my favorite documentary probably in surfing.
Good answer. What is one wave you never have to go back to?
The first time I ever surfed Nazare, and it was for the contest, probably as 2017 or is it 2016, whatever the first contest paddle event for the WSL was. I was like, I'm never coming back here. I absolutely hate it. Like, this is so scary. I thought I was going to die. This is not fun. And then, sure enough, I come the next season. And every season I've come back, I've liked it a little bit more. I haven't quite said... It was never the wave itself that... Right. Besides Nazare, it's never the wave that deters me. It's maybe the crowd. Actually, I visited a wave in Indo where I was like, yep, I never have to come back here again because there's 40 guys that are paddling around me and just blowing every wave they go on. And no one seems to know about etiquette. Actually, Desert Point's one of the most perfect wave, but there's just so many guys and it's the easiest roll in, and you have guys that just want to fight over waves and are paddling around everyone and they're jiu-jitsu masters, and you're like, sure. I just want to get one good wave, and they end up ruining it because it's like a god-awful sight to see them ride a wave. Like, you see the most perfect wave and they're just in front of a barrel the entire way, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'll just go surf 12-footers somewhere else where, they wouldn't bother.
Right. That's such a good answer. So unique answer where it's like, it's not the worst wave that you never want to go back to. It's maybe the best one that humans have maybe ruined, where you're like, it's a hard hang,
I'm all about everybody having fun. And even if it's crowded, if there's etiquette in the water, and I never really believed in it, but localism's kind of nice because it keeps people in line a little bit.
Sure.
And a lot of these places in Indo there's no structure to it. And you have guys that are black belts in jiu-jitsu or fighting and want to fight. And you're like, I'm not willing to fight over a dumb wave. No matter how good it is, it's like, what's the point? Yeah. I just want to like take my turn and get a good wave. And if somebody's been waiting, I will let them go on that wave. If they blow it, they're back of the line, but that's the way it should be. Yeah. And when, and then when you just, people that are hyper aggressive in the water, that suck at surfing, I'm not trying to like call them out that hard, but I am. It's like, dude, my eyes are bleeding right now. And the reason why they're bleeding is because of your attitude in the water, and then you're just ruining perfect waves. God never intended for this to happen.
Fair enough. Yeah, I agree. It's all about
But
self-awareness
hey, if you were
at any
cool,
level, right? Yeah.
If you're cool and you're trying to get better and you're having fun and you're taking turns and yeah, maybe you're blowing a wave, dude, that's fine. Like, but you're having fun and you're cool and you're respectful. That's what surfing should always be about. Everyone should be able to get waves. Even as crowded as if we just all took turns, we'd all get more waves. But everyone likes to cut in line or do stuff. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, you kind of got to play the game if you're going to catch a wave. And it's just that's maybe the worst part of surfing. And I've discovered the perfect area of surfing is surfing big, slabby 12 to 15 foot, because you don't quite get big wave Daves on it, and then you don't get guys that are, just capable of paddling a 6-foot wave.
Right.
You're only left with guys in like the Nathan Florence category.
Sure.
And they're chill. When you're surfing with them, they'll rotate. Except for at Pipeline, they'll never give you a wave at Pipeline, no matter how good of a friend you are. That's
Darwinism in action, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, all right, everyone's self-selecting into this space. But that's a good segue. Yeah. If you only get to surf one wave for the rest of your life, and for this one, you can dreamcast it. Just your friends, any conditions. What wave would it be?
If it was consistent, it would be Jaws. It's a 6-foot wave that breaks like a 60-foot wave. It has the most faces to it. I can approach it from so many different perspectives. It's one of the few waves on Earth that you could do every single sport on it, and it's the best wave in the world for those sports. It's the most challenging. I feel like there's the most left on the table for performance. It tests your spirit. It gets you closer to God. There's all these sort of things. It's also 15 minutes from my house. It's in my backyard. And if there was just one wave ultimately that I could surf consistently, it would be that one.
That's a great answer. Best person to share a lineup with?
Best surf person. I mean, it's always going to be, a friend that, that wants to share waves with you. I've been able to surf with some amazing people on the lineup. Right now, it's probably catching waves with my daughters. That's the best. Besides that, it's having people that want to see you succeed. And in big waves, there's no better feeling than when, someone you admire and one of your good friends calls you onto a wave, and they're not doing it to just get you out of the lineup or send you over the falls, but they're like, this could be the ride of a lifetime. Go, go, go. You're in the spot, get it. And then them celebrating with you afterwards. That's kind of what it's all about. And you try to reciprocate that every time. And find people to surf with that are equally stoked to just, watch you surf.
A great answer. We maybe already answered this one, but worst person to share a lineup with?
Oh, I mean, the worst person to share a lineup with is for sure somebody that, is just trying to take all the waves, and there's just no etiquette. And, you have two types. You have someone that unfortunately is uneducated and, doesn't realize what etiquette is because they learned at a camp that didn't instill the values of surfing. And then you have guys that, think they own the ocean and that they deserve it more than you and all these things. And it takes away surfing a little bit, and try to avoid those types as much as possible. You find yourself in lineups when the waves are that good, and you try to kind of work, if they have a certain rhythm, you try to be on the other end of their cycle, so you just never actually see them. But yeah, I mean, it's just anyone that's just a jerk. I mean, I understand you could go in the water being upset about something, but once you're in the water, you should always be able to like have separation from that and come out hopefully a better person. And I try to, when things like that escalate, that's when I go and grab my hydrofoil and I go surf a wave that's unsurfable, and I end up riding waves with two of my buddies on the same wave, and we just have the time of our lives. And that's to me, I'd rather surf a worse wave with less people and having fun than the best wave with a bunch of arrogant people.
Well said. Okay, last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by...
I will next achieve a state of happiness by taking my girls to the beach, and on a competitive level, I'm doing a channel crossing this weekend and going as fast as I can across that channel and riding 1,000 waves.
Kai, Lenny, thank you so much for coming back on the lineup. Congratulations on the 4th season of Life of Kai. Congratulations on everything, certainly the family.
Thank you.
And look forward to watching what you do next. Thanks again, man.
Appreciate it. Stoked to be on.